flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay. I'll have the clerk read the roll call, please.
Fitzwater, Graham, Hensley,
Present.
Hussey, Kimna,
Here.
Mihalovich,
Here.
Prather,
Here.
Schreiber, Ward, Wiseman.
Okay. We don't have a quorum as of yet, but we have word that we will have soon. But with that as a limitation, we're going to go ahead and proceed. Welcome back to the United States and Jefferson City, Mayor Turgeon.
Thank you. It's good to be back in the USA and especially back in Jefferson City. So I will say we had a wonderful visit to Lynchburg, to our partnership city, and looking forward to next year, and I hope that all of the council will come with us next year. And also went to Greece to visit family, and you're welcome to come there too. It is 1:30 in the morning there, so if I doze off, I'm going to apologize in advance. But it was a wonderful trip, but it's really good to be back, and I know while I was gone, you all have been working hard on city issues and also on the budget. So I appreciate that, the work that city staff and everyone has put into it. And I had reviewed the budget before I left, and I have left all of you with a letter that I do every year with the budget. So I'll just work through that, and I believe everyone has it in their in front of you. So I'll just touch on a few of the highlights here as we present the budget. And I want to start, of course, by talking about that this is a plan, and we look forward to having council input on every aspect of the budget and also having the public input, too. So this is a great opportunity for people to pay attention and learn what the city's doing. I know it's being streamed, and so people can actually see what we're doing, and it gives them an opportunity to reach out to council members as well. So about the fourth paragraph in, I talk about wanting to congratulate staff and council for receiving the Government Finance Officers Association Distinguished Budget Recognition, and we appreciate the hard work of council and staff that it takes for those awards. And then the next part about the overall budget and revenues, I believe you all went over that on Monday night's meeting, so I won't mention it again, but the numbers are in here for the overall budget. And
we did adopt the revenue figure.
Yes, so I appreciate the work you've already done on that, so I won't go into all the details, but it is there in front of you. And then page 2, mentioning the salary and wage adjustments. This piece I thought was very important to have in the budget, which includes a 2% salary and wage adjustment for all full-time employees. This does exclude any increase for the city administrator and all part-time with benefit employees. So that information is in there. I do believe the 2% is important. I know in the last couple of years when we did the city's classification and compensation plan, there were a lot of recommendations, and of course this does not fully fund that, but it does have a start. And the next paragraph talks about the pay for performance method. There really is not enough to do a merit-based evaluation process, but this is something that I do believe is very important to have the 2% in there. The next paragraph talks about the assuming the 1.9% increase in health insurance costs and 0.5% increase in the dental insurance cost. The last paragraph talks about the departmental budget restrictions and the ask of the departments, knowing of the revenue restraints, to identify decreases to some of their operational budget line items. And I know that's always difficult for departments to do, but we certainly appreciate the fact that we are being diligent and the department directors are working hard to identify any of those possible savings. The next page, on page 3, talks about some of our capital expenditure fiscal challenges for the city. So we're always asked what are some of our big challenges, and it certainly includes the aged equipment and vehicles, deferred maintenance for buildings, and then it talks about some of the projected estimated funding gaps of $300,000 for buildings and over $1 million for vehicles and equipment annually for the general fund, and then what are some of the impacts of that as we react to the vehicle and building maintenance issues. Then towards the bottom, the staffing levels, and you'll see that there's not new staff identified in the proposed budget that we put before you. And the next piece about transit, keeping the subsidy in order to balance the transit budget, and also knowing this is very common for communities and cities, that this is, sometimes people hear the word subsidy and there could be a concern, but this is something, as we know, every year going through the budget, that this is a very common practice for cities, and how important, of course, transit is. And there's a few other notes in there for transit. Going to page 4, which continues on transit, and there are some possible recommendations to think about for the future in transit. It also talks about airport and debt financing, and then the bottom part, general fund, unreserved fund balance, and reminding, of course, that our financial policies designate a minimum of 17%. And I guess kind of following up towards the bottom, the last bullet point that talks about some uncertainty at this time with the effect of the tornado and flood-related expenditures, and what that will have on the general fund balance. Disaster response costs will be reflected in the FY19 expenditures and possible budget supplementals. There will also be ongoing disaster recovery efforts, such as increased demolition costs, increased building permanent plan review activities, flood recovery, costs at the airport, et cetera, that are not included in the FY20 mayor's approved budget that will impact the general fund balance. So all that being said, I've been very pleased with the budget that's put before us. I made really no changes from what was presented after the city administrator and staff presented the budget to me, and we looked through it. And really the last item I mentioned about the uncertainty with what could be ahead with what we've been facing with the tornado and flood, that is something that I think is important to keep in mind, and you'll see that I did not add things into the budget and kept it, I think, I think it's just very smart to be aware and know that there are things that will come here at us in the future as we move forward, knowing the challenges we face during the recovery process, which will be a long one. But I also feel very confident because we are being cautious and we are being aware of what some of those challenges could be. So present that to you, and on behalf of the staff, I appreciate what they have done to get this to us, and I really look forward to, although my budget is already being presented, still being a part of the process, and looking forward to council's ideas and thoughts when it comes to this year's budget. I'll turn it back over to you, Councilman Mihalovich, and ask if there's any questions of council on the mayor-approved budget.
Left, yes, Councilman Graham.
Hey, welcome back, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Carlos.
Just have a question, maybe it's for you or for Steve, and maybe this came out of Public Works, but I heard of talks of a possible part-time position that needed to be added in that area for, to help with building permits and all of that. Was that something that's a part of this, that would, or is that something that was just being discussed at that committee meeting?
Actually just signed some approvals for that today. That will be out of this current year's budget related to tornado.
Right.
And if, as with many of the tornado-related expenses, we're going to try to pull that out of the current year budget, and then we may have to come to council for approval on a or some supplemental appropriations. But right now, the plan is that we'll try to cover as much of that with the current year budget that we can. The impact of that is that there's less money potentially that'll be added to the fund balance from the current year for next year. Right. But we kind of walked through some of that last time. Right. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, it does. It does. I was just
yeah, not a budget for FY20 impact. And that's just, to help us, that specific tornado-related workload.
And I think I heard that it was going to be just a part-time position. I don't know if that part-time went into October or if it was just going to end before our new budget cycle begin next year. I guess that was the main question. So.
I haven't had a discussion on a time, put it this way, there has not been a discussion with me on the time frame.
Okay.
Certainly the budget ends,
Right.
and we got a new one started, but I think that there may be an impact for the next year's budget for that particular position, but it'll only be used as needed, and it's not like a permanent part-time position or somebody that's here every day. It's really going to be on an as-needed basis.
Thank you so much.
And Councilman Mahalovich, when I mentioned that I did not add anything into the budget, I could be more specific that I did not add in pink sheet items. I know that's a process as we go through with council, that if they find, or as council finds items that they may want to add in, and balancing that out with taking things out. So I did not add any pink sheet items. Thank you.
I do have a question with regard to page 2, departmental budget reductions
Page 2
of her letter,
memo.
of her memo.
Okay.
What the impact of that budget, that reduction, that is for next year, right? I mean, they've not asked to reduce their budgets for the remainder of the year. They've asked to project less for next year.
Correct, and it's probably worth a little conversation because, and really that was an attempt to try to encourage some conversation for next budget year where I asked department directors to give me a 7% reduction, and they noted some items, some of which, some different department directors handled that different ways. The significance of that, to me at least, is that it's going to necessitate department directors making a lot of adjustments throughout the budget year, probably more so than they ordinarily would, just because some accounts go over and we cut some different accounts, and some of those may have some fiscal challenges as the year goes along. And that's something the department directors typically do, is they make those adjustments, and you may be over in one particular line item and you could add that to the next line item to cover those expenses. But there is, it is a challenge. It was a challenge anyway, and then to make those additional reductions just continues that challenge. So I want to make sure you understand, one, that they went through that, but wasn't any real magic to making those adjustments, and you could argue about whether there was enough sufficient flexibility or not in those. But so some of it is just an opportunity to look at some of that flexibility. Okay. But it is a challenge.
Okay.
It was a challenge.
Any further?
Just for clarification, so that 7% was is the total budget, or is that each department to look at how they can come up with 7%, or is it 7% for all?
We went through and had some individual departmental discussions. So some of them, it wasn't every line item, because every line item didn't make sense.
Right.
So it just was a place to start some conversation. So I made some adjustments based on those conversations. The significance there, though, again, is that department directors will need to make, I'm very confident, they do anyway, and that's part of their job, but need to make some, probably more of those kinds of adjustments than we typically would do, just because we're cutting out some of the flexibility.
Okay. Thank you.
Any further questions? Did you have a presentation that you were going to go through, or was that?
Yeah,
Okay, so that's item 4?
budget highlights.
Yes. Very good.
Okay.
Proceed.
So you should have a copy of the PowerPoint slide that we're going to be going through. So this is just a high-level look at the numbers in the budget. The total budget for the city is $65,147,789 proposed for FY20. Of that, the general fund is $32,906,901. The next highest fund is the wastewater fund at almost $13.3 million. Then we've got Parks and Rec at a little over $8.7 million.
and transit at $2.5 million, and then the lodging tax at 1.2, and then the rest of them are below the $1 million mark. The next slide is the general.
I have a question with regard to that. Seems like we had a general sales tax estimate of $5 million annually.
Correct. So that is cash flowed. So the cash flow request for this year is the $4,557,500.
Okay, very good. Not collections, or cash flow. Thank
No,
you
the
for-
collections are still estimated above $5 million.
Okay, thank you for the clarification.
So the next slide is the breakdown by department of the general fund budget of $32,906,901. And we will be going over these in detail with each department director, so I'm not going to belabor it, but it is a breakdown of the amount by department. The next page is a pie chart of those total fund expenditures of $65 million by the account classification. So total funds, the personnel services represents almost 54% of the proposed budgeted expenditures for the year. Debt service is the next highest or next biggest piece of the pie at a little over 11%, and that is the wastewater sewer bonds. And then contractual services is the 8.5%, and the capital projects 7%, and so on. The next slide is the general fund expenditures of $32.9 million by those same, yes.
See if there are any questions with regard to this chart. I want to be sure. Okay. Could you explain the capital projects? What is included in the capital projects? 4.5?
Mostly that's the sales tax G projects.
That's okay. We're not building, that really is all the projects we're building under that sales tax G.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
So that page 5 is the general fund expenditures of the $32.9 million broken down by that same account classification. So you can see with the general fund, we're at 77.5% of the budgeted expenditures are for those personnel services, which is salaries and benefits. The next biggest slice of the pie is contractual services, then repairs and maintenance, and so forth. And then a pie chart of the general fund, $32.9 million by department. And I just want to point out that toward the bottom part of the pie, the 31%, 2%, and almost 24%, those added together, almost 57% is for public safety.
Mr. Chair.
Councilman Graham.
Going back to that pie chart, under mayor and of council, the 117,000, what's all under that?
Well, we'll go into that detail when we go through each of the departments, but almost 109,000 of that are salary benefits. So the biggest bulk of it are the council salaries, and then the prosecuting attorney salary is paid from here as well.
Okay.
Yeah, that's 35,000 of it.
Gotcha. All right.
So moving on to total fund revenues by account classification. So this is the 65 million again. The sales tax represents almost 36%, fees and charges 31%, the franchise utility tax 11%, and other and property tax are the next two big slices. The next page is the same type of pie chart, but only the general fund revenues, which changes the picture a little bit. We've got sales tax representing almost 38% of our general fund revenues, our franchise utility tax at 22%, property tax at almost 17%, and then fees and charges 11%. And then this last page is an illustration of the property tax for someone who's living in Jefferson City. And you'll see at the top of the page, the title includes that the median home listing price, according to Multilist, in July of 2019 was $166,000. So here's how much someone who buys a house for $166,000 would have to pay in property tax. The city's line being the top line of 0.5561 or 55.61% of $175. Then the county at 67 cents, and the schools at a little over $4.54. So our total property tax is, for someone living in the city limits, is a little over $5.77. That's just a very high-level look, very quickly. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Councilman Prather.
On page 2, it mentions lodging tax of $1.2 million. What does that represent as an expenditure?
Those are the receipts. No, I'm sorry. Those are what we pay to the Convention and Visitors Bureau of the lodging tax that we collect.
Right.
The city does
I know
get
what I
an
thought.
administrative fee out of it, and that was a line item in the budget. I think it was $26,000 was the administrative fee that we retain, and then the remainder of that goes to the Convention and Visitors Bureau and the 3 cents and the 4 cents sales tax, yeah.
Thank you.
Questions left? Questions right? I think we're open.
Okay, and then the other document that you have at your seat is just another high-level look. I'm not going to repeat the first section. That is, once again, the total FY20 proposed budget by fund. That totals the $65.1 million. The second bullet point represents the amount of the 2% pay adjustment that's included in the proposed budget, and how much per fund that is. So the total amount for the 2% plus benefits that are included, so that's salary and benefits for the 2% increase. The total is $543,285, of which the general fund is $408,631. And then you could see down from there wastewater and parks, and then the effect on transit, parking, and airport. The next bullet point is the health and dental insurance increase of almost $64,000, of which almost $47,000 is affects the general fund. Then the loggers retirement rate changed for FY20. The rate for general employees dropped from 12.5% to 12.2%. The police increased from 18% to 18.1%, and fire increased from 46% to 47%. So the net of those increases and decrease is a net increase of $6,800. The effects by fund are listed there, with the general fund being almost $25,000, and then the other funds, because most of those are general employees, show a reduction. And then, once again, the transit subsidy for FY20 is $1,147,753 from the general fund. The airport subsidy is $250,489. And the fund balance, the estimated FY19 ending unreserved fund balance is estimated at 17.16%, and the FY20 unreserved fund balance then is estimated at 17.11%.
Okay.
That concludes the budget highlights.
Any questions? Right. I don't see any questions, so we can go on and just a general discussion about the budget. I think this would be a good opportunity if you would like the staff to bring back to you specific analysis of any element that you heard about today, or anything that you have questions about, so they're prepared to give us the best information possible about any budget item that you may have questions about. Some of those may not even become apparent until we hear the directors give their presentations, but are there any discussion or any topics you would like the staff to investigate and bring back to you, or any other discussion? Councilman Prather.
I just wanted some clarification from Steve on that 7% extra. How did that come into play, and why did you make them do that?
And it may not be 7% across the board. It's just an opportunity to have, I went through and we made some budget adjustments based on conversations I had with staff. And then we needed a little bit more just because of some of the challenges, the fiscal constraints of the budget. So, we said we need to have some more conversation, which we did. So it's just really a way to be able to identify some conversation about some additional budget adjustments to make. My point that I want to make is that all of those adjustments, even though they may be made, were not necessarily agreement or recommendations by department directors, and it may necessitate some adjustments more so than typically we would do throughout a given year.
And I'll follow up on that. When you mean adjustments within the departmental budget, or do you mean a request to the fund balance?
Those were adjustments in departmental budgets, but in the long term, it may have some, probably relatively minor, but nonetheless an impact on the typical amount of fund balance or contribution to fund balance that we would have in a given year. So, I mean, I can go through the specifics of that, but I mean, that's, it may, it just may necessitate department directors not having, they may end up spending a little bit more than, not more than budgeted, but more than we would typically have. Typically, we would have some savings throughout the year for various reasons. Maybe there's a vacancy in salary savings, or salary savings is due to a vacancy, or some under expended budgeted amounts. Maybe we don't use as much gas, maybe we don't use as many utility dollars or something like that. And if we're a little bit, if the department director sees that they're a little bit low in one particular line item, they may need to take a little bit to fill in that other particular line item. So overall, it would be relatively insignificant, in my opinion, for the fund balance, but nevertheless may have an impact.
I think going into this year, especially with the unknowns that have been described as the flood and tornado, is that that 17% is going to be tapped into. I just believe that we're going to be using some of our fund balance.
I would agree. That's more of an impact on what happens in the current budget year with fund balance, yes.
So then that triggers you and your staff to find a way back to the 17% once we dip under that. So anything in the future, next year, you can't look towards the fund balance to be balanced. Otherwise, unless your plan will be multiple years, and I guess you wouldn't know that until we really get a full grasp of our resources that have been going to go towards repair and maintenance of flood damaged and or tornado damaged properties.
I would concur with that. But right now, we just don't know the total potential impact of tornado and flooding. The anticipation, though, for example, we were talking about the part-time building assistants, is that we would obviously try to cover some pieces of that through our existing budget and some of the different opportunities where you may have some flexibility. But it's certainly, I can anticipate that there'll be some bigger expenditures coming. I just don't know what those all are right now.
I know we're trying to not, Councilman Moran, please.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't some of this reimbursable up to like 75% that the federal government, or am I totally off on that?
No, we do anticipate there being some reimbursement. I just don't know.
I know.
And the from my point of view, Margie may have a different opinion, but we're going to have to upfront a significant portion of that. Now, some of that is just, regular salaries that are always occurring, we're already paying that, and maybe some expenditures in gas and vehicles and those kinds of things. So there may not be a direct impact for those kinds of things, but there are some other kinds of expenditures, overtime, maybe some supplies, maybe some equipment, those kinds of things that we need to pay for up front and then submit for reimbursement. And then, of course, what actually gets reimbursed, we hope that we get some significant reimbursement there.
And not knowing, when that time frame for reimbursement may be, the fund balance could remain at 17% next year, looking at it. I mean, I know we're looking at both aspects of it, dipping below 17 and trying to find a way to get that back up, but it also could, with the reimbursement for next year, could be at 17 as well, too. So it's the unknown is what I'm trying to say.
And the importance of having that cash up front right now to pay for some of those kinds of things, whatever those may be.
Right.
I know we got airport, for example. Is that going to have an impact on fund balance? It may.
However, big impacts on fund balance is going to be not funding any equipment or vehicles or that sort. So that's going to hit the fund balance, almost guaranteed.
Any effort to reduce uncertainty that can be made during the budget process, would be great. I know, but I know there's a lot of uncertainty, and that's what's creating will be the biggest challenge of this budget cycle, in my opinion.
And if I could, it's not atypical. It's not unusual to be, that's why you have a fund balance there, is to be able to use it when you do have an emergency, and we had one. So, we're fortunate to be able to have sufficient, or some funds there, whether they're sufficient or not, it remains to be seen, but there's some funding there, and that's, the purpose of that fund balance is to use it when there's an emergency, and certainly qualifies as an emergency.
And let me remind everybody at this time that the city administrator recommended a 20% fund balance, and we kind of agreed to a 17% restricted. So, but having that fund balance has been a good guiding post for us, and that policy is held true. I think it's been a good,
It's a minimum of 17, right?
Yeah. One other clarification with FEMA. FEMA have identified, designated this Cole County, but was that just for families and individuals? It didn't talk about public infrastructure yet. Am I correct?
I think we just got the
that.
public declaration for Cole County.
Okay.
I don't think Callaway County was in. Do you know offhand? I don't think.
Yeah, so it is, public assistance has been awarded for Cole County now,
Okay.
but nothing for Callaway County at this point. But there are some other pools of money. We're going to give a report on it Thursday for the airport. Trust fund is going to hopefully help kick in to help repair some of our things at the airport.
Okay. Stay tuned.
Lighting, fencing, things like that, not terminal, but other things that relate to the service of the airport.
Great. Okay. That'd be that's 7:30 Thursday? Next Thursday?
Yeah, next Thursday morning.
Yeah.
Next
Okay.
Also update on some other related kinds of tornado-related expenses, so.
Just give an update on tornado as well, some of the numbers we're seeing from our department.
Okay. Very good. I don't have any more questions, so I'm guessing there's not going to be any more questions since I'm dominating the questions. Okay, left and right. I entertain a motion to adjourn if we're not going to have any other discussion.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. Oh, any against? Motion passes.
I was just going to say, staff is prepared to go through some of the other budget departments if you want to get a few, at least like mayor and council, city administrator, and some of those out of the way.
I would hope that we would hold off on that to where we have more council members here to hear the conversations that we're going to hear from staff. I think it's very important that we have more council members here to hear from the different departments. I think that it's very important that they hear, and they're not hearing secondhand stuff. So. But thank you, Steve.